Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa Mawlana Abil Qasim Muhammad. وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Our series of discussions go into its 8th night. All of these nights have really been building up for one purpose, and that really is Ma'rif of Ahlul Bayt. There's a difference between reading books, and there's a difference between the light of Ahlul Bayt shining in a person's heart. There's two types of knowledge that one has. One is a knowledge through wasila, reading books, hearing, seeing, through your senses. But there's a type of knowledge that's known as ilm huduri, that knowledge by presence which is manifest on the heart of a person. In essence, that is the true type of knowledge. That knowledge that comes from alam al-Quds onto the heart of a person. This is where the entire journey of ma'rifah begins. Otherwise, you notice that 99% of the world don't actually understand what true knowledge is, true ma'rifah is. You look at the world today and you'll see most of us are still stuck in the material world. But the journey actually towards Ahlul Bayt begins at the level of the heart. And that is the level of light itself. What we're here to do from these majalis of Imam Hussein is to bypass and short circuit the entire movement towards the Imam as quick as we can do. So really, through your tears, what you're doing is you're opening up a dimension of the heart so that there's a direct connection with Allah, so that that light can shine. In essence, that's what it is. What you'll see is that for the vast majority of people, we live in the physical world. Therefore, when we talk about the aql, actually there's nothing to do with the aql. We're living in the world of wahm, in essence. As you go through the internal journey, you come to find that the first stage really that Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about is this world of multiplicity going into a state of unity. Until you don't get to that state of unity, your intellect is not an intellect actually. It's still living in the world of wahm. All the information that you have, all the knowledge that you gain, all of that is maqam wahm. It's only when the level of asma and sifat of Allah comes in that you come to the maqam of aql. Look, it's a bit complex what I'm saying. I'm going to talk for 5 minutes at a complex level and then I'm going to come down again. And the reason I'm talking on this complex level is that maybe one day we'll get an opportunity to discuss this further. One day maybe you'll go and research, and one day maybe this will come to you. Look, Amir al-Mu'mineen in Hadith al-Haqiqah, when he talks about the different stages to Kumail, he says the first stage is what? Mahw al-Mawhum. Basically it means the eradication of the world of multiplicity. So when I see, I don't see you anymore. When I look towards all of you and creation, all I see is Allah. That movement to that unity is known as maqam qalb. And there's different stages higher than that. So imagine, we haven't even begun our internal journey yet, let alone come to understand Ahlul Bayt. To understand Ahlul Bayt requires a seer, requires a journey through Amir al-Mu'mineen. We haven't reached that maqam of Amir al-Mu'mineen yet. Here Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Kumail, he says the first stage is this, Mahw al-Mawhum. And then after that he says, only when the entire multiplicity is destroyed, then do you come to a stage of Sahw al-Ma'loom. Only then do you come to a stage when the haqa'iq open up to you. So it's an internal journey. It's a movement of the heart, it's not a movement of the mind. It's a journey that you go inside of yourself to come to know God. Inside of yourself rests maqam Muhammadi. And it's for you to get there. Look, you'll never get to Allah. Why? Allah's la mahdud. If you get to the bridge, that bridge will take you towards Allah. The first movement, therefore, is towards Ahlul Bayt itself. When you get to that maqam of Ahlul Bayt, only then can you get to the maqam of Allah. Otherwise, it's in the way that Rasulullah says, Ana madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha. You cannot get to the Prophet until you don't get to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Anybody who claims to have got to the Prophet without Amir al-Mu'mineen is impossible. Here, the door is the most important thing. If you can't get through the door, you can't get through to Rasulullah. In the same way, the city which is Rasulullah, the batin of that city is Allah itself. So therefore, to get to Allah requires you to get to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Without getting to Ali ibn Abi Talib, you've not got anywhere. You're still at the maqam of Waham. Remember, your elders will say, this is a Wahmi, this is a Khayal Wahmi, for example. You're still there. You haven't got to the level of the intellect yet. Intellect is when the Asman Sifat of Allah shine on your mind. Aql is where Ali ibn Abi Talib took his ashab. The vast majority of the world is still at that maqam of Waham. Still don't understand truly what the haqaiq is. Haqiqat is coming to understand Zahra alayhi salam. Human beings can't get there until the heart's not open. The easiest way of the heart opening is what? Is coming to this majlis of Imam Hussein. Focusing, crying, and you'll see the evolution in 10 days. For those people who started 10 days ago, their journey, on this 8th day, you can see a difference on their faces. For those people who came, and okay, it's good, you should come, but they've not been focusing and paying attention, then you find that they're still where they are. To get to where you need to get to requires the heart to open up. This is what's important. Look, let's continue where we started. So that's my 5 minutes, basically, of complexities. Maybe one day what I'm saying you'll come to understand. As time goes on, you'll understand what I'm saying. When the 12th Imam comes, what is the purpose of that Imam? He is there to take you from Maqam al-Tawheed, where Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Mahw al-Mawhum. That is where the Anbiya came to take people. But anything higher than that Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about is the job of the 12th Imam to take you. This is why for the Anbiya, it was to take the human being to Maqam al-Tawheed. For the 12th Imam is to take you higher than that to Maqam al-Wahdat. Look again, if one day we have an opportunity, we'll discuss it. This isn't the place to discuss that. Because it's too complex at this moment. I need another 5-7 hours. And I know time is short. If we had the time, I'll go into Hadith al-Haqiq of Amir al-Mu'mineen. If we had the time. Actually, no, let me touch on a little bit of it. So that tomorrow, or if Allah gives me life in the future, we'll come and discuss it. You know, people say it can't be explained. You give me time, I'll explain it to you. It can be explained. Anything can be explained when a ma'soom is speaking to ghayr ma'soom. If Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen was speaking to Imam Hassan, then I'd say, I don't know how to. You know why? When ma'soom speaks to ma'soom is a different dynamic. When ma'soom speaks to somebody who's a ghayr ma'soom is a different dynamic. See, one day Kumail and Amir al-Mu'mineen are moving side by side. And Kumail asks him a question. He says, Ya Ali ma'al haqiqa. He says, Ali, what's the reality? He's asking about the reality of creation. Amir al-Mu'mineen looks at him and says, Malaka wal haqiqa. Kumail, what have you got to do with haqiqa? What have you got to do with haqiqa? Right? Amir al-Mu'mineen is replying. Kumail is asking. Now remember one thing, even if a person is not ready, when you knock on the door of wilaya has a way of bringing you up. That's a message for all of us. Learn to knock on the door. Some people go, they knock, they don't get a reply, they get disenchanted and they go. That's not what you're there to do. Here, Ahlul Bayt are testing you to see how resilient you are. If you sit on the door and you keep on knocking, then you see the overflow comes. So here Amir al-Mu'mineen, as if he's knocking him back, he says, Malaka wal haqiqa. What have you got to do with haqiqa? Kumail now pushes Amir al-Mu'mineen because he understands, if this door doesn't open, then there's no door in the world that's going to open. And he comes to know that this door is a special door. This door is a special door. Let me explain it to you in an easier way what door this door is. Salman comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, Mawla, we've heard Hatim al-Ta'i was very giving. Hatim al-Ta'i, pre-Islam, is very famous. Sakhi. There are 4 qualities that if a person has, regardless of what their background is, or religion is, or race is, if they have those 4 qualities, hell is haram on them. One of them is a person who's sakhi, generous person. You'll notice the sign of a good family is that that person is sakhi, generous. This is why Imam Hussein has said, go to a person who is of good pedigree, of a good family. Don't ask your needs in front of just anyone. Right? Now that we're on this, let me give you this hadith and I'll come back to on this one. One door opens up another door. Somebody comes and they knock on the door of Imam Hussein. And when they walk in, they see Imam is sitting there with his companions. As he's sitting there, this person comes in and says, Mawla, I have a need. Imam says, shh. Why? Because there's people there. What Imam doesn't want is for you to show your weakness, to expose yourself, to make you dhaleel in front of other people. Imam says like this, he says, write it down. You know the whole concept of Ariza that you have on the 15th of Sha'ban? You learn this from Imam Hussein. Imam wants you to write it down so that you don't expose yourself to anybody else. So here he writes it down and he gives it to the Imam. And here Mawla says to his companion, go into the house, bring whatever he needs and give it to him. But here the Imam says something. He says there's 3 types of people that you should go to, and that's it. Don't ever expose yourself. He says one of those types of people is a person of good pedigree, of a good family. Because you know if you go to a person of good family, they're not going to go and expose you to anybody else. So bear this in mind. Even when you do put your hand, if God forbid a situation comes in your life, and it does come, if ever it happens, inshallah it doesn't do, God forbid. But if ever, God forbid, a situation comes where you have to put your hand out, make sure you go to somebody who you and I would say khandani. Make sure that they're of a family pedigree. That when you put your hand out, they will give without ever putting it back in your face again. The most important thing though is this. If you want to go to somebody, go to Ahlul Bayt. Go to the door of Ahlul Bayt. So here now Amir al-Mu'mineen, Hatim al-Ta'i. Now let me tell you something about him. Hatim al-Ta'i was a person, he had 40 doors. In the law stories, they say 40 doors. You find that when Hatim al-Ta'i used to sit on his seat, people would come on the 40 doors he would give them. When Hatim al-Ta'i died, his son said, I want to be like my father. His grandmother was there. She says, son, you can't be like your father. She says, why? She says, I gave birth to him. I know how your father is like. You're not like your father. He says, no, I want to be like my father. He says, fine. Let's see if you can be like your father. Knock on the door comes. Hatim al-Ta'i's son dresses, hides his face, comes out. As he comes out, he looks as an old woman. He takes some wealth, takes some gold, gives it to her. He comes back satisfied. He sits down, he's smiling. He's thinking, right, I've achieved something. Again, a knock on the door comes, another door. He goes, he opens the second door. He sees that woman was there again. He says, didn't I give you on the first door? She replies, she says, is your father dead? He says, how do you know? He says, I went to 40 doors knocking, your father never turned me away. This is Hatim al-Ta'i. Here Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Salman, he says, Salman, Hatim al-Ta'i is sakhi. He is generous, he is giving. But Salman, no. When a person comes to my door once, they don't need to go to a second door. I give them so much on the first door. So Kumail now comes, he knows, the door that I'm knocking at, if this door opens, it's so much that is beyond my wildest imaginations. He knocks again. He says, Awalastu sahib al-sirr, he says to the Imam, are we not your sahib al-sirr? Here sahib al-sirr has a dual meaning. Sahib al-sirr means confidant in the literal sense. But here in the irfani sense, sahib al-sirr is a person who's attached to Amir al-Mu'mineen at maqam al-sirr. Now you may ask me, what does sir mean? Let me explain to you what sir is. Sir is that level where Allah communicates to the angels. Sir is that level where Allah communicates with the Anbiya. Sir is that level, it's a higher level above the nafs of a person, qalb of a person, ruh of the person is where sir is. So sir is a special communication that Allah manifests on the heart of a person. What Kumail is saying, Mawla, we're attached at that level to you, that when we walk, we know where you are. When we talk, we know where you are. When Malik al-Ashtar was poisoned in Misr, and his wife, remember that tradition that I narrated? His wife says that, Malik, when I asked you what ishq was, you never told me. Now that you're dying, I come to understand that ishq is what you feel for Ali. He says, what can I do? I can hear him from Egypt, hear him in Masjid al-Kufa. So you're meant to be connected at that stage. In the same way, when people talk about the Ghaybat Kubra, the attachment to the 12th Imam is not a physical attachment. It is an attachment at Maqam al-Sir. Kumail is saying, Mawla, am I not your Sahib al-Sir? He says, yes, you are. But isn't it sufficient for you that what overflows through me sprinkles on you? He says, I'm basically, in our language, he's saying, I'm Madhar al-Ajaib. Allah's Asma and Sifat overflow from me. When it overflows from me, it comes onto creation. Allah's rizq manifests in me. When it overflows, it comes into your hands. Right? In fact, if I may go a stage further, all of creation manifests through Ali's heart. The wasila that Allah uses, lam mahdud, when He wants to make something into mahdud ta'ayyun, He uses Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali is Yadullah for a reason. Yadullah, when He gives, it comes into your hands. Look, I want to say more than that, but I get worried sometimes to say more than that. I get worried to say more than that. If I was to say that there's no one in creation but the rizq comes from Insan Kamil, you wouldn't say anything because you wouldn't understand what the irfani connotations is. If I was to break it down and say that there's no one in creation but that the rizq comes from Ali ibn Abi Talib, then some of you would have a problem. It's not mutually exclusive, by the way. If it was the case that Allah directly gave rizq into your mouth, then nobody would work today. There's only one Maryam and nobody else is Maryam. And even then, from Alam and Ma'wara, when rizq comes down, it comes down through a medium. There is no such thing as an apple in the world of Allah, because apple is mahdud. Allah is absolute. It has to filter through something to come to the physical world. That filter, that Yadullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, is me. Right? Now look, I'd like to go a step further. I'd like to go a step further. What is Yadullah? Learn Yadullah. I know that there are some Sunnis here, so learn Yadullah from the second Khalifa. What do you mean? Right, one day a person was going around the Kaaba. Amir al-Mu'mineen came and he slapped him. Slapped him. So the person went to complain. He said to Umar, he said, Umar, I've been slapped on the face. He said, by who? He says, by Ali. He says, call him. Called him. Amir al-Mu'mineen comes. He says, Ya Ali, why did you slap him? He said he was going around the Kaaba looking at an mahram. Umar looks up, he says, what can I do? Aynullah saw, Yadullah slapped. For the amount of people here, that wasn't loud enough, come on. But when you do a nara, you want Najaf to hear. No, that's better. That's better, mashallah. People need to know that the followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen are still alive. Just in case they're sleeping, it's enough to wake them up. So anyway, now coming on to what we discussed yesterday. So we're laying a foundation, in particular waiting for those people who are rushing to get here quickly after prayers to get here. Now, I think at least the majority are here. The next 5-7 minutes you'll see more people trickling in as they come from other majalis. Awliya Allah, basically. Yesterday we left off on a particular tangent. We were discussing the awliya of Allah, the wali of Allah, their characteristics. We stopped off on a particular point, and that was to explain, as we said yesterday, that today we'd look at a person by the name of Sayyid Musa Zarabati, if you remember, Arif Billah. You hear about Agha Qadi, Sayyid Ali Qadi, but you don't hear about Sayyid Musa Zarabati. In fact, Ayatollah Shushtari says is that Zarabati, if not the same, is bigger than Sayyid Ali Qadi, right? It requires a bit of explanation. I'm going to come on it. Before I do though, remember this, that when the karam of Ahlul Bayt come on you, doors open that you wouldn't have expected ever to open up. Bear this in mind. Sometimes you're able to do a journey of 1,000 years within a blink of an eye. If you look at somebody like Khur, they're able to do that. Ayatollah Qadi became Ayatollah Qadi because of Abul Fadl Abbas. 40 years of Riyadha, his eye opened in the haram of Abul Fadl Abbas. When I say his eye opened, the eye to realities of creation, Haqaiq al-Ashya, open in the haram of Abbas. Abbas is Babul Hawaij, both spiritually and physically. So therefore, when you ask something which is more loftier than just your physical needs. Ask your physical needs, but something far more loftier. Heart needs to open. We continue to emphasize this. Remember, if the heart is dead, you'll find that you'll be in depression for the rest of your life. There are people who go through all of their life not realizing what the truth is. Heart needs to open up. Once that heart opens up, then you come to understand truly what sakina is. The skin of the heart is. For a person, therefore, to actualize what we know as wilaya, requires for a couple of prerequisites to be in place. One of them, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, is the company that you keep. If you keep company with the wrong people, there is no way the heart is going to accelerate to where it needs to go. This is why the tradition says, if you're with a person who commits sins, you may not do that sin that they do. For example, if they lie, it's possible you may not lie, but there may be another vice inside of you that may come out. So firstly, be very vigilant with the people that you're with. If you're with people who are spiritual and religious, you see that they motivate you to become better. But if you're with people who don't do that, then you find that you go to terminal decline. You'll notice that sometimes in our society, you find gossip. And in fact, in this day and age, everybody gossips a lot. Gossip is a vice of the intellect. Your intellect has been created for ilm. When it doesn't get it, you go to gossip. So today, everything is on your fingertips. Social media is all about gossip. Those prompts that you get on your phone, all about gossip. The reason why today everything is bite-sized, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, is because you're used to gossip. You're not used to ilm. Your focus isn't there, your attention isn't there. So when you're stuck on the level of gossip, which is level of wahm, you never develop. If you're around people who gossip, you'll find that you'll never truly understand ilm. In the same way, in the couple of nights that we've been discussing, to the extent that the food that you eat has an effect on you. So in the olden days, the Urafa made sure that they ate less haywan, animal products. Why? Because animal attaches you to the dunya by its very nature. So they would lower their animal content so that they could become more mujarrad, more immaterial. Here Ayatollah Kashmiri says, he says, if you want to start on the spiritual pathway, there are 3 things which are important for you to do. The first thing he says is tahajjud. At nighttime, worship Allah. Qum al-layl, as the Quran says. If you worship Allah at nighttime, you find that the heart opens towards Allah and its realities. He says the second thing which is important is fasting. Fasting accelerates your journey towards God. And you'll see this. Those people who fast a lot, you'll find that their heart is more latif. And the third thing which is important, he says, is that make sure you don't talk for the sake of talking. Some of the conditions of a Shia of Ahlul Bayt is that they don't if I may use this term, have verbal diarrhea. Some people just talk and talk and talk. Here, what Ahlul Bayt says, listen more, talk less. If you look at somebody like Ayatollah Bahjat, for 4 years he didn't talk, hence he became Ayatollah Bahjat. Ja'far Mujtahidi towards the end of his life. Abdul Karim Kashmiri, Allama Tabatabai. I can list for you a lot of ulama who at the end of their life he noticed that they didn't talk. If somebody asked him, they spoke. Why? The accountability of the tongue's too much. There are 19 major sins just in the tongue. Sometimes you say something that destroys and puts barriers in your heart towards Allah. So there are 3 things here, just bear this in mind, right? The final thing which is important is this, that there are certain du'as that a person does that brings barakah in their life. That barakah goes on their family. Look, one of those things is this, be very vigilant on a weekly basis, if you can do, practical tip, is to recite Hadith-e-Qisa. Recite Hadith-e-Qisa in your home, because you'll see special barakah comes. If you want to know how to preserve your children in Akhir al-Zaman from leaving the path of the Ahlul Bayt, on a weekly basis recite Hadith-e-Qisa. Ayatollah Baha'u'ddin emphasized this, Hadith-e-Qisa. And you'll notice that there's secrets within Hadith-e-Qisa, especially towards the end, that remove difficulties from a person's life. One of them is Hadith-e-Qisa. One of them we discussed yesterday, which is Ziyarat al-Yasin. Ziyarat al-Yasin is like talqeen. It's like you've already done talqeen on yourself even before your death. Therefore, if a person is reciting Ziyarat al-Yasin, when they die, when Munkar and Nakir come, the reply is ready for them. So bear this in mind. And if you look at Ziyarat al-Yasin, it's mansoob to the 12th Imam. Right? Mansoob to the 12th Imam. The final thing is this. Okay, Ziyarat al-Ashura is there, but it may be long for some of you. If you can recite it, well and good. And we'll look at the fadila of Ziyarat al-Ashura in a minute. But the final thing is this. Du'a tawassul. Let me give you something. Take it as a gift from me. A solution to your problems. People have asked in the last few days, help us. So let me help you today. Let me help you today. 2 solutions I'm going to give you. I used to pray behind an Ayatollah by the name, you can imagine, Shahabadi. Ayatollah Shahabadi was the son of the Shahabadi. Ayatollah Shahabadi was about, well, at least in his 80s when I remember it. He asked him a question. He said, oh, mashallah, you're never sick. He says, I've never had to go to the hospital in my life. I said, what's the secret? He said, the secret is this. Have you read in the Quran, have you read in the Hadith, that the Ahlul Bayt say, that if Surah Hamd was to be recited on a dead body, don't be surprised if it gets up? I said, yes. He said, all of my life, every day after Fajr, I recite 70 times Surah Hamd. If I feel that I'm coming down with a sickness, I make the intention that today's is because of that. He says the build-up of that over the last 40 years has meant that I've never had to go to the hospital. Ayatollah Shahabadi, when he died, probably close to 90 or in his 90s, did not have any issue. He went and won a go-backer. You know, they do dua, people, that Allah, when you raise me in a way that I'm walking, I'm talking, there's no issues with me. No blood pressure, no cholesterol, no diabetes, no heart problem, no nothing. Barakah of 70 times every day, Surah Hamd. First take that. Take it as a gift from me. The problem is, because I'm giving it to you for free, you won't implement it. Now that I'm on it, I may as well tell you something. I was in a part of the world, I won't say where I was. So a person comes to me and says, look, you have a dua. We want the dua. So let me test these people, see how much they want it. I said, if you give it to free, they won't ever. As a joke, I said to them, as I was sitting there as a joke, I wanted to see how serious they were. I said, if all of you empty your wallets, and I'll give it to you. I promise you, the pile of wads of cash started to rise and rise. People were chucking money. So by the end of it, it was there. So I said, look, take it and give it to the mosque. They said, you might as well take it and take us out for dinner. Anyway, so I said, let me give you the dua now. Then when I gave them the dua, it's been the last 6 years they still recite it. Why? Because I had to empty their wallets. I'm not going to ask you to empty your wallet. But what I will do is if anybody recites this, I'd ask you to donate to your mosque. Right? Because this masjid requires your donations. A masjid doesn't work without that. This masjid is a masjid of Allah. This is where dhikr of Imam Hussein goes. It embarrasses me when a masjid comes and says, ask people to donate money. You're Shias of Ahlul Bayt. If you're following Hussein, you don't need to ask, you should already be giving. Right? So after this majlis, the poor guy comes up and says, please, for this majlis, or for these majalis, donate. Be a follower of Ali ibn Abi Talib, put your hand in your pocket, give without anybody ever knowing. Right? So with this in mind. Anyway, first thing is Surah Hamd. The second thing is this. If a person ever has a problem in their life, I'll give you the solution. If you can do, when you see that a problem is befalling, in terms of your risk, in terms of your children, in terms of your health, whatever it may be, after every wajib prayer, recite one time dua tawassul. It may seem like a lot to you, but anyone who I know who have done it, within 40 days or so, they've come back and said, our problems have been resolved. Proof is in the pudding, right? Eat it and see. Don't ask anything else. Recite it and see, and then come back after 40 days. What are you saying to Ahlul Bayt in dua tawassul anyway? Ya wajihan indallah, ishfa' lana indallah. Imagine. Who are you looking towards? You're looking towards Muhammad and Ali and Fatima and Hassan and Hussein. Do you think if you take the tawassul alayhimus salam, that they're not coming to help you? Right? Bear this in mind. Now look, it's taken me 8 lectures just to finish the muqaddim I wanted to do on the first night. I have another 7 nights of material to discuss, and we only have 1 night to go. I've been promising for 2 days, said Musa Zarabadi. Now let's begin on him. Who has said Musa Zarabadi? And many people from across the world have said, make sure you do a good job on this one because we don't have enough time. So if I don't finish today, I'll finish it tomorrow. So I will take my time. I'll do a good job, meaning I'll take my time on this. Within the school of mysticism within Shias, in the modern day, there are 3 schools, right? One is the school of Najaf today, which is the school of Said Ali Qadi, which actually wasn't actually the school of Najaf. In the lifetime of Said Ali Qadi, people would stone his house because it was seen as something very negative. The actual school of Najaf was the school of Sayyid Murtada Kashmiri, Allama Kashmiri, the great-grandfather of Baqir Kashmiri, who lives in, I believe, in Virginia, who runs Imam. So his great-grandfather was a person by the name of Allama Sayyid Murtada Kashmiri. His school was the actual school of mysticism of Najaf. He came from Lucknow originally. When he came to Najaf, some of the Arabs questioned his siyada. How is it possible that an Indian can be a Sayyid? He was so upset, he went to Imam Rada alayhi salam. He said, Mawla, these people are doubting me. He was pure of heart. That night when he went to sleep, he woke up in the morning. Under his pillow was an entire shajara nama with the mohor of the 8th Imam on it. Hey, go and show him that. After that, he became one of the great Urafa of Najaf. He was one of the teachers of, for example, Nuqodik Isfahani. So one school is the school of Allama Murtada Kashmiri. One school is the school of Sayyid Ali Qadi. Then in Mashhad, there are 2 schools running parallel. One is the school of Murtada Kashmiri, which migrated to Mashhad. But there's another school which from Isfahan went to Qazwin, from Qazwin came to Mashhad. That school is the school of Sayyid Musa Zarabadi. And Sayyid Musa Zarabadi's school is also renowned for the ulum al-ghariba, the occult. So ilm Jafar, ilm Ramal, Nujum, Simia, Limia, Kimia, all of these sciences are part of that school of Sayyid Musa Zarabadi. If I had time, I'd go into all of those knowledges. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi had 2 students. One of them is Hashim Qazwini. The other one is Mujtaba Qazwini. Both of whom are the teachers of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani. So I've given you the trail now, so for you to understand. Because you've not heard of this name, Sayyid Musa, I'm going to explain to you as best as I can so you come to understand. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi died when he was 59, 60. Had he lived longer, he would have been a household name. This Sayyid used to be in Qazwin. Allama Hafiz Ziyan says, he says, after I'd studied for 7 years with Nuqudaki Isfahani, I thought I knew everything. He said, one day when I was taken to by Mujtaba Qazwini to Sayyid Musa Zarabadi, I felt like a drop in front of an ocean. As I walked, I could smell the scent of Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida. And when I went to Sayyid Musa Zarabadi, his spiritual state was such that it was as if he took my soul and he sucked it in. I became majzoob in him. And this Sayyid Musa Zarabadi smiled at me. He looked towards me. He became the teacher of Allama Hafiz Ziyan, the famous Arif. How does Musa Zarabadi become Musa Zarabadi? He says that when he was younger, he said to his father, Father, I want to go and work. So that his father said, go to the shop and work. He used to go there and sell fruit. There were some stones. There were big stones which were lightweight. There were small stones which were heavyweight. When he realized this, he started to use the small stones because they were heavier to make sure that he's charging the right price. When the owner found out, he sacked him. He said, look, why are you using heavyweights for? He says, I want to make sure that the money that we're getting is halal. Anyway, sacked him. So this Sayyid Musa Zarabadi went. And over there, then he said to his father, now I want to go to Ilm ad-Din. His heart was pure, and everything starts with the purity of heart. Accelerate forward now. Accelerate forward. There are 3 stories I want to say. After that, I'll conclude, because tonight is a big night. 3 stories. Sayyid Jalil says, his son said that I didn't want to actually study Ilm ad-Din. So my father said to me, what would allow you to study Ilm ad-Din? He says, Father, if you teach me, for as long as you teach me, I'll study. Within 2 years of his father teaching him, he passed away. So people asked Sayyid Jalil and Sayyid Khalil, 2 of his sons, how did you become mujtahid like this? How did you learn these secret sciences like this? He said, because the day my father died, the very night his soul came back to teach us. And he taught us everything all the way to the end. Right, that's a person. That's a person who's understood wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Understand Ali's servants, even when they die, they're not dead. Let alone Ya Ali. Right? Let alone who Amir al-Mu'mineen is. His servants don't. They say that when Sayyid Jalil died, he said, bury me next to my father. When they opened the grave up, they say that the coffin had become dirty, but Sayyid Musa Zarabadi was fresh as if they buried him yesterday. Right? Sayyid Jalil says, he says, if not more, my father met the 12th Imam as many times as Sayyid Mahdi Bahrul Ulum. And in Ghaybat Kubra, Sayyid Mahdi Bahrul Ulum is meant to have seen the Imam as many times. They say that the Muwakkil of the sun, because as you know, everything is controlled by Muwakkilin. He said towards the end of his life, Sayyid Musa Zarabadi could look at the sun and he could see the Muwakkil of the sun. So anyway, without going any deeper into this discussion, what I will say to you is this, that Sayyid Musa Zarabadi, they say that the Shah, this is Raza Shah, the father of the Shah of Iran. They say that Raza Shah, one day when he was introducing these material policies, one of the things he was doing was he was taking all of the ulama and he was arresting them. So he says to one of his soldiers, he says, go to Qazwin, there's certain ulama, one of them is Sayyid Musa Zarabadi. He goes, go and arrest him. So this soldier goes to Qazwin and he does a bit of research and he comes to realize that actually, hang on a minute, this guy's Sahib Karamat. So he's thinking to himself, look, the Shah's given the hukum, but what am I meant to do? How do I arrest this guy? So he says he went and he knocked on the door. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi opens it, he says, come inside. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi gives him some chai. Both of them remain quiet. Soldiers thinking, how do I arrest him? Sayyid Musa Zarabadi is giving him the chai. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi, as both of them sit quietly, he looks up and he says, look outside the window. He looked outside. He said, do you see that bird outside the window on the branches? He says, yes. He says, can you go and hold it so it doesn't fly away? So the soldier looks up, he says, oh, I'm sitting with you. How can I go there and hold the bird? He says, I just want you to think of the bird then. Just think of the bird. And it will stay there. The soldier said, I didn't understand, but I thought of the bird and I printed the bird in my mind. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi bought a pencil and paper out and started to draw the bird. After he drew the bird, he made a box. Within the box, he wrote some Isma Adam within the boxes. He says, this bird is a projection of that bird. He took a pen and he cut the neck. When he cut the neck, he says, look up. The person looked up. They saw that the bird's head fell onto the ground. He said, tell your Shah, we know this as well. Immediately he got up, quickly left, messaged Tehran. He says, listen, whatever you do, don't touch this guy, said Musa Zarabadi. All right? This guy's something else. One story. Last two stories, so you can understand. Sayyid Jawadi says, he says, I wanted Isma Adam. Look, time is going. I could see time has already run out. I've got 15 minutes and that's it. If I go 16 minutes, please forgive me. Sayyid Jawadi comes to Sayyid Musa Zarabadi. Says, oh, I want Isma Adam. Now coming to Maqam Ziyarat Ashura. He says, if you want Isma Adam, I want you to go and recite Ziyarat Ashura. How? So there's a way of reciting Ziyarat Ashura. If you recite it properly, then Isma Adam comes to you. He says that I went and Zaman and Makan and everything else was appropriate, the clothes that you wear. There's various sharait. He says for 2.5, 3 years back to back at the same time with the same sharait, I recited Ziyarat Ashura 100 la'an, 100 salawat until a time came when Sayyid al-Shuhada himself came to me and gave me this Isma Adam. I'll tell you the abjad of it. But Sayyid Musa Zarabadi hid it from all of his students. And he also said, don't ever tell anyone what this is. Imam Hussein, according to Sayyid Jawadi, said, recite this 6,000 times and the manifestation will come in your heart. If it's recited 1,000 times, Tayla Ard becomes wajib on a person. The ability to transcend time and space. Now there's different amal for this. Agha Bahjad had a different one for 10 days, whatever it was. Other people have different ones for 40 days, whatever it is. So I won't go any deeper than that. But the fact of the matter is this, that the power of Ziyarat Ashura and Sayyid al-Shuhada was such that this particular Isma Adam was given to Sayyid Jawadi. Final thing on Sayyid Musa Zarabadi, then I'll conclude. Ayatollah Abdul Qaim al-Shushtari says, he says that my teacher Mujtaba Qazwini, who was also the teacher of Ayatollah Sistani, who was also the brother-in-law of Sayyid Musa Zarabadi, says. He says that Sayyid Musa Zarabadi used to do a lot of riyadha, spiritual exercises. His power was such that he could see anything and anyone. He could see their entire life. A day came that Shaitan came to him, right? Imagine this, Shaitan himself. So he asked him, he says, why do you come? He says, I don't come for normal people. I only come for the awliya and the anbiya. I've come for you. I've come to tell you that all of the power that you have, I've given it to you. Zarabadi looks like, really? He goes, all of the tasarruf that you have, taskhir that you have, abilities that you have, I've given it to you. If you want them, then all I want you to do is just to delay your prayers by a couple of minutes for me. And you can keep it. He goes, I can't do that. He says, okay, if you can't do that, then pray awwal waqt, but make the intention you're praying awwal waqt because of me. He says, I can't do that. He says, you sure? I'm going to take all of your powers. He says, take them. As it so happened, he took everything. Sayyid Musa Zarabadi said, I lost everything. And for 6 months, people thought that I must have committed a sin, that all of my powers went. He says, I did not tell anyone, I remained quiet. Didn't tell anyone. I remained quiet what the actual reason was. Until 6 months later, for this test of Allah's, Allah gave me something that was even greater than everything that I had. Right? That, in a nutshell, is Sayyid Musa Zarabadi. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Key takeaway is this though. He submitted everything that he had to Ahlul Bayt. And in particular, Ali Asghar. Ahl Iraq say that there's certain people who are known as Babul Hawaij. When you come to their door, they give. One of them is Imam Musa ibn Ja'far. When you go to Kadhimiyya, Bab al-Hawaj. One of them is Al-Yaskar itself, Bab al-Hawaj. One of them is Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, Bab al-Hawaj. Look, I don't know how long we have. If I had the opportunity, I'd recite a full Masaib. But because I know that there is an Urdu and everything else to come afterwards, it will be difficult for me to recite like I would generally recite. One thing I will say though is this. Your mothers taught you what Abbas is. And they've told you that whenever you have a problem, come under the alam of Abbas. I want to give you a story. And I want to do it very quickly. 2007, in a city in India, Lucknow, there was a Rajput. Rajputs, as you know, they have ghaira. Husband and wife couldn't have children. Now in India, it's a different situation because everyone comes to the procession, the julus. It says that this Rajput came to the julus and him and his wife went under the alam of Abbas. They grabbed it. After grabbing the alam of Abbas, both of them said, our mothers have said, if a dua is not answered, if a prayer is not answered, come to the flag of Abbas. They couldn't have children. It'd been 10 years. Both of them came, they grabbed the flag and they said one thing. They said, Abbas, our mothers have told us that when every door is closed, your door is open. And give me a son. You know what happens? This man got so emotional, he said, if you give me a son, I'll bury him in your way. Emotion was there, right? Sometimes people do get emotional. I don't know why I said that. If somebody asked me, they said, why? I don't know, ask him. He said 9-10 months later, Allah gave him a son. Happiness came in their household. But then he remembered his promise to Abbas. He said, I have ghaira. If I've promised, I've given my word, I'm going to give my word. So that at that moment, at night time, he says that when the mother wasn't looking, I took the baby and I took him out of my village and I took him to bury him. He says that I started to dig a small grave to bury him. And I saw that this baby was smiling and he was holding my finger and my heart was breaking. He says, I didn't know what to do, but I'd promised Abbas. He said that when I put him into the small grave, I could still see he was smiling and I was feeling bad. So I pushed all the dirt over him, heavy-hearted when I went back home. When I opened the door, I heard a baby crying. When I looked in, I saw that my wife was holding the very same baby. I said, did you follow me? She said, no, I didn't follow you. Half an hour after you left, there was a knock on my door. When I opened the door, there was a very tall man standing there. He gave me the baby. He said, tell your husband, what we Ahlul Bayt give, we don't take back. What we Ahlul Bayt give, we don't take back. Brothers, today you're sitting on the door of Abbas. You don't know how kareem this family is. If you allow me to recite, I'll recite. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Aqil, Aqil, find me a woman who will bear me a son Abbas. Find me a woman of pedigree. Aqil goes and he comes back and he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, there's a tribe, a Qilabiya tribe. The Rais of that tribe has a daughter by the name of Fatima. Why don't you marry her? She, inshallah, will give you what you're requiring. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to his older brother, go put in a proposal. As you know, Rais of a tribe don't ever show their emotions. They don't get excited. They're very proper. They say that when Aqil went, he went to the head of the tribe. He says that I want to put a proposal for my brother, for your daughter. He says, who is your brother? He says, Ali. He says, which Ali? He says, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, which Ali ibn Abi Talib? He says, you mean the son-in-law of the Prophet? He says, yes. He got so excited. He says, for me, it's a yes. Aqil turns around and he says, but in our tradition, until the woman doesn't agree, we don't say yes. He says, go and ask your daughter. If your daughter says yes, then the marriage will go. He says he gets up. He goes to his wife. Because, as you know, the adab is you go to your wife. He says to his wife, ask our daughter if she accepts. Wife gets up. She goes to the friends. She says, ask my daughter, does she accept? Because there's a level of haya there. They say at that moment, Banin had just gone to sleep. What does she see in her dream? She sees that Zahra comes to her. In Zahra's hand is a dressing gown. She comes forward and she puts the dressing gown on Banin. And then after that she says, if a proposal from my Ali comes, please accept that proposal, because from you will come a son Abbas who will come to protect my Hussein on the day of. How Kareem Zahra is. As her eyes opens up, these friends come forward and they say to Banin, says that this proposal has come. Would you like to get married? She says yes. Marriage is to take place. Swords of Banu Hashim are raised. Banin walks under the swords. As she comes to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, she goes and she sits on the door. When she sits on the door, she doesn't go any further. People ask why. She says, how can I go into a house where Fatima Zahra was? A time comes when Kulthum and Sayyidah Zainab grabs one from one hand, the other one grabs the other hand, and they take Banin inside of the house. Banin goes inside of the house. She says, children, I've not come to replace your mother. I've come as somebody to serve you. They say a couple of days later, Banin comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen. She says, from today onwards, please don't call me Fatima. Every time you say Fatima in the house, I can see the faces of your children begin to shake. She says, please don't call me, because they remember Zahra. She says, I've come as a slave to your household. I've not come as anything else. From that day onwards, Amir al-Mu'mineen calls her Banin. At this stage, she has no children. They say, Ali, 10 years is doing dua. What is he doing dua for? That Allah give me a son. 10 years after, they say a son is born. As that son is born, Amir al-Mu'mineen has a tradition. Every child that's born, Amir al-Mu'mineen kisses on the forehead. Today, Amir al-Mu'mineen goes. He opens the parchments. He kisses the right arm of Abbas. He kisses the left arm of Abbas. Banin begins to cry. She says, oh my Sayyid, oh my Mawla, I've seen that every child that's born, you kiss him on the forehead. Is it because that this child is the son of a slave that you kiss him on the right arm and the left arm? He says, Banin, that's not the case. On the day of Ashura, Abbas's right arm will be chopped off. Abbas's left. Abbas's right arm will be chopped off. Abbas's left arm will be chopped off. They say one day Amir al-Mu'mineen walks into the house. You know what he sees? He sees that Abbas was very young. He sees that Banin was watching. Zainab was holding one hand. Kulthum was holding the other hand, and they were teaching Abbas to walk. He says, look at the day that's come, that my daughters are teaching my Abbas to walk. Zainab replies, she says, Father, no. Today we're learning to walk under the shadow of Abbas. Look, slowly I'm building up. Because tonight I want you to pray. Whenever anybody comes to Abbas's door, dua becomes accepted. One final thing. One day Banin is pacing the house. Pacing the house. Why? Because Fajr time came, Abbas had left. Abbas has not come back yet. So he's pacing the house. This used to be recited in Qom. They say Amir al-Mu'mineen comes into the house. He says, Banin, why are you pacing it? She says, what can I do? Abbas left in the morning. He still hasn't come back yet. She says, but look, Abbas is not a child anymore. Abbas is not a child anymore. Baneen turns around and she says, what can I do? I'm a mother. When Abbas left this morning, he wasn't wearing a niqab. He wasn't covering his face. I'm scared somebody may look at Abbas in an evil way. Says she was pacing. Fajr time goes, Dhuhr time goes, Asr time goes, Maghrib time is coming. At that moment, Amir al-Mu'mineen realizes al-Baneen can't take it anymore. So he looks up at al-Baneen, he says, I'm going to go and find Abbas and I'll call him. Amir al-Mu'mineen knows where Abbas is. He begins to walk. And as he begins to walk, he comes to a place. Where does he come? He comes to a place where there was a broken grave. Abbas was standing there. Tears were dropping from his eyes. He touches him on the shoulder. Abbas looks behind, sees his father, puts his head down. He says, son, don't you know your mother has been waiting for you all of this time? He looks up and he says, father, what can I do? At Fajr time when I was walking, a voice comes from a grave, a broken grave. The voice says this, Waladi, my son, come to me. Says that when I went there, a voice started to speak to me. She says, Abbas, if only you were there, my rib wouldn't have been broken. Abbas, if only you were there, I wouldn't have been dragged by my neck. Abbas, if only you were there, Kulthum and Zainab wouldn't have been yatimas. Look, I'm cutting everything. I'm cutting everything. One day, water comes into the grave of Abbas. Water comes into the grave of Abbas. Tradition says that the people who took care of the shrine of Abbas go to Najaf. They go to Sayyid Mahdi Bahr al-Ulum. There's a Sayyid, there's water in the grave of Abbas. Can you come and help us remove it? He says, yes. He goes. Wears white clothing, goes underground. They say as he was removing the water with a khadim looks up and he says, I have a question. He says, what is it? He says, I've heard from you ulama that Abbas was very tall. He said, this grave is very small. Abbas was very tall, this grave is very small. He said, what's the problem? He said, Sayyid Mahdi Bahr al-Ulum takes his amama off, chucks it on the ground. He begins to hit his head on the wall. He says, I wish you never asked me. He says, why? He says, you don't know, they chopped Abbas's head off. And then after that, with lead, they started to beat the body of Abbas in such a way that on the 13th, when Imam Zain al-Abidin came, he gathered all the pieces of Abbas. He said, this is why the grave is small. This is why the grave is small. Look, I'm not going to recite it anymore. My time is finished. The final thing I'll recite is this. Accelerating, forgetting everything. Generally, I take my time to recite. Today, I'm accelerating everything. I just want you to see something from the eyes of a girl. A 4-year-old girl who's thirsty. She's saying, Al-Atash. She's thirsty. This 4-year-old girl comes to Imam Hussein. She says, I'm thirsty. And then she finds an avenue. She goes to her uncle. She says, Uncle, I'm very thirsty. Uncle looks at his opportunity. All this time he'd been going to Imam Hussein. He'd been saying, Mullah, let me go into the battlefield. Mullah doesn't allow him. Again, he says, let me go into the battlefield. Mullah doesn't allow him. Accelerating forward, he sees his opportunity. He says, daughter, why don't you go and ask your father for me to go and give water? I'll go and I'll get you water. Happily she goes. She says to Imam Hussein, Father, allow my uncle to go and get water. At that moment, Imam Hussein with tears in his eyes looks. He says, Sakina, do you know what you're asking? Do you know what you're asking? Once your uncle goes after that, then be prepared. A day will come where Imam Hussein says to Abbas, Abbas, go. You want to go, go. One of the things Imam Hussein took away from Abbas is what they call as Nafidul Basira. The ability to look at somebody and kill them. It wasn't his sword that Imam Hussein was taking away. Abbas didn't need a sword. They say when Abbas goes into the battlefield. I'm not going to recite the fighting of Abbas. What I will recite is this part. They say this girl comes forward. She says to all of Banu Hashim's children and all of the children, she says, come sit down. Why? Because water is coming. Keep on looking at this alam of my uncle. As long as it's there, you'll see that water is coming. The tradition says a time comes when the alam begins to fall. As it begins to fall one side, this girl takes the water container, chucks it on the ground. She says, oh, it's children. From this day onwards, I don't want any water anymore. Let me do dua, you say Ameen. She lifts up her small hands and she just says one thing. She says, Allah, may my uncle come back. Let me narrate for you something. This is something. They say that when Mohsin Amali was writing, he says that there was an alim who went to undo the grave of Sakina. Why? Because there was water there. He comes from Jabal Amal and he goes there. I've seen the pictures of this alim. And they say that when this alim came, he undid the grave because he wanted to remove the water. Some people asked him, they said that, did you see the body of Sakina? He says that I did do. He says the body was very small. Something uncovered from her face. I did see her face. He says, what did you see? He said, I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. He said, what was that? He said, there was hair missing from her head. And he said that there was a face, there was a hand mark on her face. I could see that there was a bruise on her eye. I could see there were finger marks on her face. Sakina does dua. They say when Hurmala was brought to Mukhtar, Mukhtar says, Hurmala, what did you do? He says, I saw something. I saw when Abbas was going back, after his right arm was chopped off and his left arm, he was holding something in his mouth and he was raising his head in the sky as if to say to Allah, he was saying, Allah, if my body doesn't go back, make sure the water goes back. A voice comes from the sky and says, Abbas, we've not fulfilled your hajat, but know something. From today onwards, you become Babul Hawaij. Abbas then says, he says, then Allah, make sure my body doesn't go back because I feel embarrassed in front of a 4-year-old girl that I asked her that water would come back and water doesn't come back. Tradition says when Minhal goes back to Medina and he says, قَدْ قُتِلَ الْحُسَيْنُ بِكَرْبَلَا, Banin says to Fadl, says, give me my stick. She gets up and she goes. She says, which Hussein do you talk about? He says, Hussein, the son of Zahra. At that moment, she looks towards Najaf. She says, Sayyidi wa Mawlai, forgive me that my blood wasn't able to help Hussein on that day. The person looks up, he says, why do you say this? He says, because my Abbas was there. My Abbas was there. What happened? He said, Abbas was killed. She says, how is it possible Abbas could be killed? How is it? He says, but somebody came from behind and killed him. She says, I don't believe you. I trained Abbas. Says Banin, you don't know. He was hit on the back of the head. He says, how's it possible? He said, Abbas's right arm was cut. Abbas's left. All of a sudden, Banin falls to the ground. He looks up and says, why did you fall? He says, just tell me one thing. My son didn't have any arms. When he fell, how did he fall? Did his chest hit the ground? Did his head hit the ground? I say to Banin, Zainab's arms were tied behind her back. When she fell, did her head hit the ground? Did her chest? At that moment, Banin stands up. She says, Fadl, take me to a broken grave. She walks to the grave. She says, Bibi, forgive my son. But he wasn't treacherous. He wasn't a ghaddar. He gave his life first before Hussein. Look, I can't narrate anymore, but the only thing I will narrate is this. They say when the arrow went into the eye of Abbas, and he was lying on the floor and there was blood in his eyes. They say when he called for Imam Hussein, they say Mawla Hussein grabbed his back, chucked himself on the ground. As he comes to Abbas, Abbas couldn't see anything. He was saying, oh people, just give me a couple of minutes. My Mawla is coming. As Imam Hussein came, he said one thing. He said, Mawla, can you remove the blood from my eyes? And I wouldn't have given you the zahma, but I have no arms anymore. My mother said when I was born, I did your ziyarah. Now that I'm leaving, I want to do your ziyarah. Final thing I'll finish on is this. Sayyid Yahya Yasrabi used to sit under the mimbar of Abbas. One day a wise went. The wise recited, an arrow went into the eye of Abbas. Yahya Yasrabi said to the wise, he says, don't recite this. He says, why? He says, I'm an old man. Maybe the hadith is weak. How do you know the arrow went into the eye of Abbas? That nighttime he sees a dream. Abbas comes into his dream. He says, why did you stop my wise from reciting this? He says, Mawla, I thought maybe the hadith is zaif. He said, the hadith wasn't zaif. The hadith was strong. He said, the arrow did go into my eye. When the arrow went into my eye, it hurt me a lot. When something goes into the eye, it hurts. He says, what do? If you have a hand, you pull it out. He says, I didn't have any arms. I was moving my body side to side. He said, I was moving my body side to side. I couldn't take out the arrow. Eventually a time came, I didn't want to call Mawla Hussein. He was alone. Zainab was there. He said, I put my head between my knees. As I shook the arrow began to hurt my eye. I was feeling so much pain. I didn't know what to do. Again, I wanted to call Mawla Hussein. I knew he was gharib. I still didn't know what to do. As I shook the arrow again, the arrow was hurting me. A time came, I didn't know what to do. The only thing I did, I looked towards Najaf. I said, Father, come and help me, because my eye is hurting. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.